Hello, good evening everyone. Very warm welcome to The Conduit. It's wonderful to have so many of you here with us for this fascinating conversation curated by our good friends at IPPR about social media and its transition perhaps from a space for community to perhaps one more based around consumerism. Discuss as we shall. But yes, my name is Lily. I'm the head of programming here at The Conduit, and I wanted to say a big thank you to all the Conduit members we have here in the room with us, anyone who is here as a guest but who would like to find out more about the work we do as a social impact community. Please do come and talk to me or one of my colleagues. Would be delighted to tell you more. After the conversation, please do stick around and have a drink, as is beautifully displayed in the corner here. Do have a look on our website to see the other fantastic events we have coming up. But now, without further ado, let's focus on tonight's proceedings, and I shall hand over to Dr. Sophia Ropek-Hewson, Senior Research Fellow at IPPR, to tell you a bit more. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Lily. As Lily said, I'm a Senior Research Fellow in the Democracy and Politics team at IPPR, where I've been working on social media policy and media policy and democracy. And before IPPR, I worked in government on Homes for Ukraine and local government policy. We have a great panel here this evening. We have Kirsty McNeill, Scottish Labour and Cooperative MP for Midlothian. Before she joined Parliament, Kirsty was an Executive Director at Save the Children and an advisor to Gordon Brown. We have Ava Santina, Political Editor at Politics Joe, which aims to engage young audiences with UK politics. Before Politics Joe, she was a producer at LBC and worked at the BBC. And we also have Giles Darrington, the Head of Public Affairs at TikTok. Before TikTok, he was an Associate Director for Policy at Tech UK and Head of the Lib Dems Whips Office in the House of Lords. So thank you so much to all of our panellists for joining us this evening. I'll do a quick introduction to the topic, and then you'll each have 5 minutes to respond. And then we'll have a short discussion before we open it up to the audience for questions, and we'll end at 7:30. So the title of this event, sorry, I'm going to swivel around to reach people on my left. So the title for tonight is From Community to Consumerism, What's Social Media For? But I suppose the first question is, what are we talking about when we're talking about social media? Social media is obviously a very broad church. Sometimes we mean specialised spaces like Reddit or LinkedIn or Discord. Sometimes we mean platforms that broadcast content like TikTok or YouTube. And sometimes we talk about platforms like WhatsApp as social media. So even though they're sort of closed and private and quite different. But I think setting these differences aside, lots of the platforms that we think of as social media now revolve around short form media, and they're quite different to 10 years ago. So we did some new research recently where we asked people to look at their social media feeds and look at the top posts and categorise them. And we found that ads and brands and influencers made up over half of what people saw. So only around 10 to 20% of what people saw came from family or from friends, which we thought was really interesting. I think we found it really interesting that platforms clearly prioritise influencer content and short form video because they're super engaging. They keep us on their platforms, they make us buy things. I think that the social commerce industry, which is meaning stuff that we buy through social media, was valued at 9 billion last year, and might grow to 11 billion this year, which is comparable to the size of the UK publishing industry. So because platforms prioritise influencers, because our feeds are personalised, I think we have a more, sorry, I'm going to swivel. We have a more isolated online experience than we did 10 years ago. Fewer people are posting. People are mostly sharing things privately now. So what does this mean for our online experience? I think that having less social online lives is happening at a time when we're generally potentially more lonely. More of us are working from home. Young people are lonelier. There are fewer community spaces. And these platforms are shaping our lives. They're not just reflecting them. So I think it's important to think about what that means. So I'd like to hand over to our panellists to talk us through some of these changes to social media. What do these changes to these platforms mean for our conception of the public, for our understanding of what's normal or important, and what do we want our online lives to look like? Do we want them to be more social? Do we want them to be more interactive than they are at the moment? So I'm going to hand over to Kirsty for the first
congratulations on the report. Am I on? How's that?
Yeah.
Perfect. So congratulations on the report. It's brilliant to have it out in the world. And I think lots of you have probably come because you are of the view that there is something to see here, that there's some sort of debate we might want to have about the role of social media in our lives and whether it's harmful or positive. And certainly my constituents would agree with you, that's your opening position, that there is a problem. So I had, in the first few weeks of the year, well over 300 constituents in touch about social media restrictions around the debate around age. But I've actually come tonight to sound a note of caution, because I think there's a risk that in this debate we can take something of a literal approach and say because we think there is a problem with our online life, there must be an online solution to that problem with our online life. And there certainly are policy debates to be had and debates about regulation and law, and I know my colleagues across government are having exactly those debates with the input, hopefully, of lots of people in this room right now. But I guess my opening gambit is actually we need to think about what are the long-term trends that got us here. Why are we in a situation where we are trapped in a world of apps and algorithms and streaming and scrolling, often when we are very dissatisfied with that? What collective action problem is being presented to us when we are choosing to live in a way that we know makes us sick and makes us sad? And I think my own view is that we simply cannot separate the world of social media and that debate from the world of social space and that debate. And what I mean by that is we are increasingly living trapped behind our front doors and glued to our screens because the other places in which we used to gather and be together and attend to what happens in the spaces in between us, those other places are closing at a rate of naught. IPPR affiliated sociologist Sacha Hillhorst describes it this way, that we are living through the radical domestication of existence. And increasingly we're living very individuated lives where we're only primarily in contact with people to whom we are related or with whom we are romantically intimate. And that has gone alongside the decline of shared spaces like pubs, like church halls, like community centres right across the country. And that's making it harder and harder for us to find places to connect. The cost of living crisis is clearly taking a toll too. Around 43% of people now say in surveys that they're going out less and less because they're strapped for cash. So many of us feel that we're too skint to be together, and even if we wanted to be, there aren't places where we might find the time to be together. And I think that's a problem for all of us. Whatever political tradition you come from, I think you should care about that. But with your forgiveness, I want to see just a little bit about why that really worries me as a politician from the left. And it's because I think sharing space where we can develop habits of reciprocity, of give and take, of learning to live together across lines of difference, that is the thing on which all progressive politics depends. Because unlike an online community, where if you don't like what's happening, you can simply exit, you can't simply exit your local working men's club, your local community centre, your local church, places where you are spending time with people with whom you live and have to learn to live together well. And the progressive potential, I think, if we're able to reverse that, is particularly obvious in the clubs movement, which is where I'm spending most of my sort of discretionary energy as a politician, trying to revive the clubs movement. The working men's club movement is well over 100 years old, and for well over a century, it has been sustaining collective working class self-organisation. Now, I'm quite privileged to represent a coalfield seat, so we still have an inheritance of lots and lots of miners' welfares, but to give you a sense of what's happening across the country, the Clubs and Institute Union, which is the organising co-op of the clubs movement, used to issue 7 million membership cards a year. Just 50 years ago, 7 million cards a year. It used to be bigger than the trade union movement, more members of CIU clubs in this country than members of unions affiliated to the TUC. Now the number of cards issued is around 1 million. And when we lose those spaces, we lose something incredibly important, something that no digital community can ever replicate. Because here's the thing about a club. It's not just that we belong to it, it's that it belongs to us. Because of our relationship of ownership, something very important happens in how we feel about our sense of agency and control. Now, I'm really looking forward to hearing what other panellists think about the social media debates that we have to have, and we should absolutely be thinking of all sorts of innovative ways to re-socialise social media. But in my view, and that's what I hope to persuade you of tonight, doing so would be necessary but deeply insufficient. Because if we don't want to lose ourselves down rabbit holes, we need something that's good enough above ground to crawl out of the rabbit holes in order to experience. Now, the government's Pride in Place programme is designed to do that in part. Lisa and Andy's focus on new generation youth clubs is designed to do that with some humility. I hope that my work on social clubs is a contribution to that in part. But if I could leave you with just one thought tonight, when you go home, yes, think about how you're going to push for tech reform, but join something. Join anything. I don't care what it is, as long as it's membership based, as long as it takes place in real life and brings you together with people that you might not otherwise meet. So one of the key findings of this report is that it's getting harder and harder to connect with real people that we actually know on our feeds. That's a tragedy, but let's go one better. Let's connect with real people in real life, because life really is better when we club together.
Woohoo!
Everyone's got notes, so you're asking the slapdash entry you've ever known. But I'm Ava, I'm the editor of Politics Joe, and we are a news brand that we appeal to the under 35s, which has now become a bit of a tired phrase. It doesn't really apply to the brand anymore because we actually have a big split. So we are under 35s, then we have a break where I presume people are having children and are too busy to have a look on YouTube at our content, and then the over 60s are then really interested in our content. So whenever I say anything about this is for young people, there's a load of pensioners going, what about me? Then I say, well, you've got the triple box, so actually we are always in that way. I actually just want to pick up on something that Kirsty just said. I think that's a really compelling point about how you need to join local institutions. There needs to be working men's clubs. I couldn't agree with you more. There's some really great programmes actually that Sadiq Khan has introduced in London about getting young people out socialising again. But what it ultimately boils down to, or what I've found when talking to young people for Politics Joe, is that people don't have any money. And so they can't go to the pub in the way that perhaps I used to 15 years ago. That doesn't age me. Maybe I went underage. I don't know that. But yeah, there's a huge money problem, and I do think it's leading people down a rabbit hole of spending a lot of time at home, a lot of time on social media, and that is bad for everyone because it means when they turn up to the workplace, they don't know how to have conversations with people who don't agree with them. So I agree to agree with that point. I come from a bit of a different perspective. I think I'm normally fighting against whatever Giles is putting out on TikTok and the regulations that trying to fight them so that I can go viral. And I'm also trying to work against any legislation that the Labour government bring in, because sometimes it can hinder what money we can make online. And so, like the online safety bill, it's been devastating for us because we were previously publishing porn all the time, and now we've lost that market. But it's interesting because reading this report, there was a lot about algorithms, and that is actually something seriously now that we have struggled with, particularly on X, formerly known as Twitter, where the algorithm does not cater to politics, or politics that's not even far right. I mean, politics that is honestly totally ridiculous. If you're not being racist on there, I don't think you're getting promoted, and I'm not going to get sued for that because it's just speculation. I didn't actually mean it. So what I think when I was reading this report, and one of the more compelling arguments I thought about recommendations was about algorithms. It was about how do we open up social media again, so that if you are the average user using one of these sites, you are going to experience a range of different views and a range of different content that is not necessarily in line with what is deemed to be the most viral content, monetizable content possible. And that's something where I'd really like to see the government actually getting involved in, is breaking down those barriers. We're talking a lot at the moment about a social media ban under 16s. I'm really, really against it. I think it would be a terrible idea to introduce a ban for under 16s instead of holding the social media companies that are capturing them to account. You know, sorry, I really do feel like we're here, and I feel like we're embarrassed for teachers in the room, and you know, just totally unfair. But you know, these sites are designed to keep you on there as long as possible, and they show you more and more shocking content every single time you enter the site as a way of keeping you there. You can argue with me about that in a minute, Charles. But that's the point at which I think we need regulation. There was a landmark case against Google just a couple of weeks ago around addiction. And a woman won her case that actually she would become addicted to YouTube, and now people are possibly, if they don't win their appeal, going to have to pay out to her. That is where we should be looking as policymakers, as journalists, as report writers, that's the point at which I think that we can break the awful cycle rather than banning people. I mean, it's like with alcohol. I don't know if when you were at university you remember the kid who'd never had a glass of wine before they got to university, but I guarantee on the second day of Freshers Week they were upside down in a gutter somewhere because they hadn't been used to it. So you're going to have this huge cliff edge at 16 where you have children who wake up one morning and they can get back into social media and they're not going to know how to use it. It's not going to, it won't be a natural, well, look, I don't know what it could lead to. Maybe it could lead to something horrendous. Immediately they'll get into terrorism, but not that far. But I just think it would be a cliff edge that wouldn't be conducive to any public good. I think I'm about done. Oh, right. Please contest.
Hello, I'm Giles from TikTok. It's a really interesting debate you're having, so thanks for holding it. I think there's probably four things to say, some of which kind of deals with some things that others have already been saying. But if I start with, I think we're kind of just keep on up what is social media and how we define it, because I think it's important for the context of the debate. So TikTok is an entertainment platform. They have about 30 million users in the UK, so significant, just slightly less than half the population using the platform on a regular basis. We would not describe ourselves as social media for one very clear and important reason. Social media graph, which is something which is pioneered by Facebook effectively, and still used by a number of other platforms today, is a graph which basically says when you log on, we want to know who all of your friends are, and we're going to look at what they're looking at, and then we're going to show you that. We're going to try and rank that based on who's doing what, etc. But it's fundamentally driven by who your friends are and what they're seeing. That creates some challenges, I'd argue. It creates quite a lot of filter bubbles because your friend group is going to become, by definition, slightly narrower. It can also lead to some of the challenges that you've seen with people wanting to keep up with the Joneses, the kind of classic of so-and-so's on holiday, you live in a beautiful place and I'm stuck here in my flat, and all that kind of stuff. TikTok pioneered what's called the content graph. So the idea of a content graph is it isn't about who your friends are. That is relatively little interest to us. What we're doing is when you log onto the platform for the first time, we're asking some broad preferences about the types of things you're interested in. And then as you use the platform, you watch a video all the way through, you like something, you share something, we're learning about your preferences. So if you like, if you watch a video of a cat all the way through, maybe you're interested in animals, maybe we should show you some animal videos. Maybe it turns out you're not interested in dogs, but you are interested in lemurs or whatever else. What that does is two things. First of all, it kind of drives people to communities. I think that, and there are challenges to this as well, and we can talk about those in a bit, but drives people to communities, which can be really, really powerful. So if you're skeptical of saying this in an argument, but if you're a massive nerd like I am, who's like interested in Dungeons and Dragons and things like that, you're going to find a community of people who are interested in those kind of things. You'll see those kind of content. That can be really powerful, particularly if you're talking about some younger people, LGBT kids isolated in rural communities. That might be the only way of engaging with that. So I think that's possible. The second thing it can do is help people drive to things which are maybe of interest to them, which then allow them to take action on the platform. One of the things we consistently see around TikTok is that kind of movement from I've seen something and I'm going to then go and do something about it. The classic example of that is, and there's some research we're going to be publishing in a couple of months, I don't want to supplement too much, but the number of people who have gone to their local coffee shop because they've seen it on TikTok. Now, it's not being shared by their friends, it's being shared by local, what we call casual creators, people who may be making the odd video, who are then saying, hey, I've just been to this lovely spot, because of the way the algorithm works, you're seeing that, and then people are actively going there. Similar thing we see like BookTok. Has anyone ever heard of engaged with BookTok here? Great. So BookTok is an online book review community effectively on the platform. It's about 77 million videos on #BookTok. And that is individuals going, hey, I've just read this great book. It's fascinating. We've seen two things from that. The Publishers Association did some work a couple of years ago saying, I think it's off the top of my head, 59% of 17 to 24-year-olds have said that they've discovered a passion for reading because they've engaged on BookTok. And we've recently used some data in Europe about the number of people who then bought books. And increasingly now, if you go into your local bookshop, you will see the, as seen on Book Talk stands, which again is taking people out of their, looking at their phones and into something else. We see similar things in education. Again, some of the work we've been doing suggests that there's millions of people who view educational videos on the platform, and about 3 million people have said they've signed up to courses, other things, based on the fact they've seen and been engaged with science, maths, even basic things like, there's a great one which is going viral at the moment, for any young fathers like I am, which my wife keeps bugging me about now, called Pints and Ponytails. Has anyone seen this? It's basically a load of dads getting together in pods and learning how to do girls' hair, which is a nightmare for me, and constantly something I've been roused about. So again, they're taking that, because it's going viral, because it's being seen by people in that same situation, they're then able to organise communities there. I think the final, fourth and final point I make, in addition to the how things work on platform, off platform, is it's also a really important pipeline for successful business. And you talked about commerce and all, really important pipeline for successful businesses and individuals. So we have seen countless examples of people looking for careers and things which previously have not been open to them, being able to get there because of TikTok. Ultimately, what we're really proud of as a platform is we've created incredibly useful tools. So if you've got an idea, you can pick up your phone, you can film your idea, and then get it out online. We talk about safety and how we protect that space in a moment. But if you're someone like Hannah Lowther, who is a young woman who was literally working at Tesco's and filming videos of herself dancing in the aisles in her coffee breaks, directly because of that, she was identified, brought to casting agents, and then ultimately she's now in the West End doing Legally Blonde. And there are hundreds and hundreds of examples like that. There's a small business in Glasgow that I was speaking to recently who said that they'd suffered really hard during COVID. They were running out of money. They weren't on TikTok. They didn't have a TikTok account. They hadn't put themselves on TikTok. But a few creators had been to their premises, and because of that, suddenly they had an influx of people coming to them, and that sustained their business, which allows them to stay open in the community. So I completely agree, actually, with Kirsty, that the balance between online and offline is really important. And indeed, when I'm speaking to certain MPs about harmful content, they're like, well, who's posting this? I'm like, it is also your constituents. These are people, right? There's a whole bit of educational work we need to do to upskill people on how to use social media correctly. But we also need to recognise that there are bad acts in society, online and offline. They're going to be looking for exploitation places, but they are overwhelmed by the number of people looking to use those kind of spaces to do positive things, whether it's on platforms or indeed in their communities. I'll leave that now.
Thank you so much, Charles, and thank you, Ava and Kirsty. I mean, just to launch straight into having a bit of a chat before we open up to the audience. I mean, for a site that doesn't describe itself as social media, I think it's interesting that you talked about how TikTok drives people to communities. You talked a lot about community building, and I mean, how is that not social? First of all, and I guess secondly, the way that a lot of people use TikTok, I mean, is they watch it by themselves. They don't post anything. They don't really share anything. They just watch it like TV. So I suppose the kind of community building you're talking about is in lots of ways quite sort of isolated. It's a sort of personalised user experience where you're watching a stream of content. So I suppose I don't see the community building aspect in the same way that you do. I appreciate that you can engage with new communities and find new content, but to what extent is TikTok interactive, and actually, to what extent does it actually enable sort of social community building and social interaction?
So again, I think the distinction I make on social media, and I think this is just really important to define terms, because there's, and particularly when we're talking about regulation, there's a whole lot of different things you can do in different spaces, and different types of platform have different challenges. So just to give you an example of that, one of the things we've seen directly feedback from parents, from academic experts, and others, is some of the real challenge around direct messaging, particularly for young people where an awful lot of bullying starts. So we made the choice to not allow direct messaging on the platform for under 16s. Now you could say that's taking away a social feature, but actually we think it's probably the right thing to do on a safety front. There are other patterns that make different choices. My point is purely that the way that our algorithm works is it's not intended to show you what friends are doing. We do actually have a separate friends tab where you can just see that content, but the majority of what we're doing is that kind of content recommendation via the feed page. I think my point is that what we see and consistently see, and have done since the first iterations of TikTok, is that people looking for community and finding things which they're genuinely interested in, rather than some of the kind of traditional broadcasters showing you like, this is what we've got on, and you can either like it or turn it off. People are finding things they're genuinely interested in, and because of that, those are often acting as a shop window into a wider kind of exploration of it. So again, I think of something like Big Manny, right, who's an education creator. He makes content which is designed, it's kind of roadmap acts of doing science experiments. He's doing that, and because people are finding that content because they have a vague interest in science, or they're frankly very interested in that kind of culture, are suddenly seeing, oh, that's something interesting, where can I find more? And I think part of our responsibility as a platform is to work with NGOs, partners, experts to help people find kind of conduits off platform to other spaces where they can engage. So we spend a lot of time thinking about, okay, kind of what partnerships can we do to promote go out and do this thing, go out and donate to this charity, and get involved in all those kind of things. I think the key thing is a lot of the time when you're dealing with kind of social media and an attention economy, is it's really hard to get the majority of people's attention. So if you have an algorithm which is going, actually these people are interested in the thing you're specifically talking about, it becomes much easier then to kind of convert that to kind of that positive community-based action in a whole variety of ways.
Thanks, that's really interesting. I mean, I suppose you're talking about personal communities rather than, I mean, a lot of what you're talking about is a person building their feed based on a set of different interests. So I suppose it'd be interesting to see how much community building in real life, in the real world, happens as a result of TikTok. People on TikTok finding kind of new communities. How much of that translates into?
I'm hesitant to step on the report. I know it's I'm currently working on finalising the launch plans for, but I think we actively do consistently see that. And again, I think others will have views on this, I'm sure, but having kind of your social experience via social media, where actually, you may have friends, but you're just speaking to them online, you're just messaging back and forth, I think is very different. And actually, I question kind of the true value of that versus something which is engaging with things which you're interested in, which you're then going out and finding the local club which does sport, teaching how to do kids' hair, whatever else it might be. And actually that's where people can break out of that, of just speaking to people online and into communities. And I think that's what TikTok's been quite good at.
But why do you have the messaging feature if it's on social media? I mean, why, if you took it away from the under-16s, why did you not take it away for everyone? Because then you could be an entertainment platform.
I think some people want to use it, and so we'll offer things that people want to use. I mean, that'd be reasonable. I think the point, we don't allow a whole range of functionality which other social, other messaging functions do have. It's a good place. But we know people want to, I've just seen this thing, I want to share it with someone I know, and that's a useful way of doing it. But it's not a driving force on the platform. The vast majority of the time that people spend on the platform is on that your For You page, kind of with the algorithm and content.
But whenever I'm on TikTok, and I'm scrolling at midnight, and then I come onto usually the worst video I've ever seen, I accidentally send it to one of my friends because there's a little pop-up bubble at the bottom, and it'll encourage me to send it to someone that I follow, or someone mutual follow each other on TikTok. It sounds like being pedantic, but there's also a feature within your notifications which, if you follow someone back, it'll encourage you to send a hello to them. So I know it sounds a bit pedantic, but it's just that is social media, right?
Well, again, I think my distinction in social media is purely what the algorithm, the way the algorithm is designed. I think social media, from a we would argue, I think most people who develop these types of systems would argue, social media means a social graph, broadly speaking, versus a content graph. there are a load of social functionalities on our platform, absolutely. But I think it's a slightly different thing about how people are engaging with majority content. That pop-up box, yeah. I've had a few people, I've had a few, someone recently say, I just sent something to a minister. Oops. So yeah, I understand some of the challenge of that particular box.
We haven't talked about, so Amy, you brought up the extent to which content on TikTok is diverse. I don't want to spend the whole evening grilling you.
That's fine.
But I mean, you talked a bit about news and about the algorithm on TikTok. To what extent do you consider what's being platformed and how it's shaping what people see, how it's shaping our conception of the public, how it's shaping British attitudes and British culture? I mean, these people spending a lot of time on these platforms, and these algorithms are very important now to our cultural and our social lives. So I suppose, to what extent is TikTok thinking about how its algorithms platform a diverse range of content?
Really don't want to monopolise the conversation either, so I'll try to be quick. So I think there's a couple of things, specifically when it comes to news. So there are circumstances, big world events, etc., where we recognise that people will be coming to our platform to search for information about something. There, we actively have tools to make sure that the things they're going to find first and foremost are credible news sources, as you'd expect. I think there's a whole range of kind of trust and safety elements as well, which sit alongside that, right? So we do not allow misinformation on the platform. We have entire teams looking at trying to identify misinformation. While some of us have moved away from using fact checkers, we still actively have fact checkers. We use Reuters in the UK, and that allows us to send things to Reuters to say, either is this true and should be allowed, is it not true and should be removed, or in quite a lot of instances this may be the case, they don't know either, and then we will actively take it out of the recommended feed. So it can still exist on the platform, but we don't want to kind of push it in prominence. I think the other thing I'd say is, because of the recommended feed and the way it works, we are able to do things to diversify people's feeds and content. Now, there's two ways of looking at this. One is a kind of very self-interested version, which is, even if you're really, really interested in football, you do not want to see 30 videos of football in a row. You get bored, you don't come back, it's just all the same content. Oh. So actively, we want to make sure that each video you're seeing is slightly different, on different topics you may be interested in. Again, look at all of the things you're interested in and trying to find those things where you might be interested. Or occasionally throwing in something like, hey, there's a load of really kind of interesting, like, high sea shipping videos, which I keep getting, because I keep watching them because they're super interesting. It's not something I'd have automatically chosen to watch, but it is fascinating. You learn things about those things. But we try and diversify those feeds. It also means that when we see people acting kind of in unsafe ways, often on perfectly reasonable, safe content in isolation, we can take action. So the great example of that is healthy eating videos. Quite rightly, there's a huge kind of complaint for how to cook low-calorie meals, and that's kind of safe and actually quite positive in lots of ways. But if we see people who are literally flicking through everything just to find those videos, that can be a sign of something else. And what we have is dispersion technologies, which will try and guide people out of that behaviour, de-rank those kind of content for them, and show them other things. And I think that, broadly speaking, when we speak to experts, works better than kind of cutting off cold turkey, because often if you do that to people in those situations, I'll just close the account, create a new one, and start doing something again. So it allows us to have that slight ability to tailor and make sure it's diversity. Fundamentally, again, self-interested. We want it to be an entertainment platform, therefore we want people to find things entertaining. One final thing I'll say is that there's often, I think, a misnomer that the kind of job, certainly from a TikTok perspective, is to keep people on the platform. That is not the goal as we see it. The goal is to keep people coming back to the platform, which is very different. Because if you're spending hours and hours on the platform going, oh, I actually really upset, I've wasted all my time and frustrated, then you ultimately turn it off. What we're trying to do is make sure that if you have an entertaining, enjoyable experience while you're on it, but then actually doing things to kind of people off. We've been the very first platform who, for example, for under 18s, now we have an hour-long prompt, so that default screen time setting. So after an hour, you'll be told, you've probably watched enough, you have to actively stop and put in code in order to get past that. That was developed with Boston's Children's Hospital to try and nudge people out of things. Those kind of tools, which I think, again, to the government's consultation, I think would be really interesting is what is that best practice and what can you use to kind of ensure there's a rising tide lifting your boats and getting people into a more responsible is probably the wrong word, but healthy relationship with the way they use platforms that's different from not having them at all.
Thanks, Giles. Thanks. Ava and Kirsty, I mean, having listened to Giles, I mean, what do you think about the way that these platforms are how do you think they're working? Do you think that TikTok and platforms like TikTok are doing a good job at showing us diverse content, at helping us be social with each other, connecting us to each other, or are there things that you would do differently? I mean, something we recommended in our report was the development of a public social media platform with different values, with non-commercial values, that could be entertainment-based, but also be more social and represent something different in the market. What do you think about that? Do you like the idea of alternatives? Do you think we're stuck thinking about social media as meaning one specific thing? Do you have any thoughts on it?
So I think if I just start with where Ed finished, because before we get into what's the right policy or regulatory or legal response, I think we need to come to a common understanding of where we think the balance of benefits lies in a number of things. We actually just need to have that collective conversation as citizens. And one of the things Ed said towards the end is, one of the benefits from your point of view of platforms is that they can curate and personalise at a rate never seen before. And that can be very enjoyable, it can be very beneficial, but it does also have negative consequences that we need to talk about and decide whether we are happy with them. So the example you gave was, when it was old style broadcast, you just watched what was on, and that might be frustrating. It might mean that you had some boring summer holidays as a child, but it also meant that there was a period when Wimbledon was on where the nation went and hit balls against walls and practiced tennis, and when there was a World Cup on, kids took jumpers to parks and learned to kick a football, and when there was moments of national togetherness, people participated in them together, even if it wasn't quite their thing. And I think, not to be nostalgic about it, I think there's something beneficial about that for our society, and we at least need to have a conversation about what we are losing when we become habituated to the idea that absolutely everything at any moment of the day can be curated to our very precise personal specifications, because that has implications for how we think about how we live together. And I couldn't agree with you more about your point that actually most people are using engaging social media for good. And one of my favourite, Desmond Tutu, talked in his book about the fact that he's one of these people who actually really enjoys watching the news, and the reason he really enjoyed watching the news is because he said the bad stuff is on it because it's unusual. So we report crime because for the most part, most people are not committing crime. Actually, there's billions of people on this small and fragile planet, and we run along together every single day without harming each other. Almost everyone is completely amazing, almost all of the time. There are going to be times where we have different points of view, and there need to be trade-offs and compromises made if we're to live together well in our democracy. And I think one of my worries that I'd like us to navigate collectively is if you, all of us as sort of political actors, balance different bits of our ideology differently and we weight them differently. And I am more than anything, I am a Democrat. So I'm a progressive, I'm an egalitarian, I believe very fundamentally in those things, but more than those things, I believe in democracy. And for me, my egalitarianism and my Democrat instincts are mutually reinforcing, because they're based on the idea that all of us have an equal right to be heard, and all of us have an equal right to get a bit of what we want, and in order for most of us to get a bit of what we want, we'll have to concede some other things. And to me, the process is the point. The process of messy, deliberative, compromise-laden, the process is the point. And I guess my worry about the personalisation revolution, which you are celebrating, is it's kind of training us out of the idea that the process is the point. And if we decide that's where we want to go, that's fine, but that too has to be a process that we go through and we talk about it before it's sort of enshrined in all of our policy and regulatory legal frameworks.
I'm going to go on a bit of a tangent because I agree with you that most people do just want to do good things and do post good content, but it's the bad content that I worry about. So this is going to sound like a little bit of a tangent, but you'll see where I'm going. So when we are publishing on across TikTok, X, YouTube, whatever social media we're posting on, I've always taken the view that we should abide by Ofcom rules, not least because I had to study them and I'm going to use this information, but also because I do think that online news should be held to the same standard as traditional linear news. So, I mean, for example, we're in local elections right now. We are going to be approaching a period of purdah. Online news does not have to obey the rules of purdah. You know, on the day, if I wanted to put a graphic up in Politics Show, which was go and vote for reform, I could do that, and I wouldn't face any repercussions for it. But it doesn't really make sense to me that I would be allowed to do that, but then any other linear broadcaster or paper broadcaster would not be, paper would not be allowed to do that. It doesn't quite make sense, and that's I think quite an easy, quick fix. The biggest distinguisher for that as well is that if I wanted to run something that was factually incorrect, and I knew it was factually incorrect, I could likely get away with that. Whereas if you are a linear broadcaster, you would be held to account by Ofcom, you would be fined heavily for that, or you could even face a criminal prosecution. I would not, as the editor of Politics Show, face anything for that. I just might have my content deleted by the social media company, possibly, or even demonetized. That sort of brings me to my point here, because Giles, you were saying that you use Reuters to fact check certain videos, particularly if there's a lot of search or a lot of interest into those videos. What I think that the issue with that is, and it's great to hear that you're doing it, is what happens to that video when it's not on the recommended feed? Does it become demonetized? Do you still pay the original creator for it? But I'll tell you where, sorry. So there was a select committee last year where Twitter and X were hauled in front of a number of MPs, and they were questioned around Southport riots, and they were asked, Meta as well, and they were asked, why did you allow it to get so out of control? There were people publishing online about meet up here, let's go and throw bottles at this asylum seeker hotel, and you didn't take those posts down, you just let it happen. And they were, these posts were going viral, they were doing hundreds of thousands of views. And okay, there's a morality aspect to that, and it's a social order debate you can have, but the problem I think is that those people got paid for posting those tweets. They got money for that. So you look at someone like Rupert Lowe, for example, who tweets the most extraordinary things you've ever seen, sometimes arguably rather dangerous for social cohesion. He's one of the highest earners in Parliament from X. He is paid directly into his bank account for sometimes rather hateful posts on X. So this doesn't really apply to TikTok, so you can come back and sort of come through like
it's fine.
Like the sword, but shining armour or whatever. But that's the key thing, I think, that one of the biggest recommendations that we could give to government is you need to stop allowing these companies to pay people to post factually, factually incorrect information, sometimes for the benefit of your back pocket.
We don't allow monetisation politicians on TikTok.
No, you don't, but what you were saying there, so if the creator, say if your creator has posted something that is incorrect and you have found with Reuters that it's incorrect, it's taken off of the recommended feed, do they still receive the original amount? Are they still paid by TikTok?
No, so the way that our ad revenue works, per se, is different from some other platforms. So quite a lot of other platforms, you have an ad sort of connected to a piece of content, and it's effectively a revenue share with that. One example of that. TikTok's a bit different because ads come within the scroll and they're not connected to any individual piece of content. What that means is that the way we then enable people to monetize is what's called the Creator Rewards program. That requires people to have a certain amount of followers. It requires them to be posting regularly and hitting certain high level numbers of content, because we want to make sure that we're targeting at people who are actively using the platform for people living. But it also means we can set very clear guardrails around if you have content which is breaching our community guidelines, you cannot get monetized and you will be kicked out of that rewards program. Which again, sort of A, means the individual bits of content is not going to succeed in monetization. But B, it also means there's a real risk of doing so because you actually lose access to monetization for all of your content. We think that's probably the right balance, the way we do things. I want to pick on two things very quickly that it's actually really interesting. One of which is what is the kind of consequence of breaching our rules? And it's something I spent a lot of time speaking to regulators and politicians about. Because I think you're right, it is very challenging for us. We have probably some of the most small C conservative guidelines out there. There's a lot of things we won't allow that any other platforms do. But fundamentally, what's the worst you can do to anyone? It's close their accounts. That, if you're a bad actor, if you're a fraudster, if you're someone who is using it for a whole range of kind of left, right, whatever kind of populist processes, if you're incentivized to do it, that's not the worst incentive in the world, because people can create new accounts and find ways around it. And so we talked a bit about kind of what are the consequences of that. I'll give you a bit of an example, which is a super frustrating one about the way that we deal with some of this stuff. So I remember having a conversation, this is slightly tangent, but with Financial Conduct Authority a couple of years ago, where there was someone who was posting on our platform fake debt advisory, trying to scam, potentially vulnerable people into kind of engaging in this business. Was not credited by the Financial Conduct Authority, was therefore committing a crime. We were identified to his posts, we took him down. He created new bonds, we took him down. We set up whole mechanisms to make sure that whenever he was posting, we immediately took him down. But, it's going to make money out of this, so we'll keep trying, and sometimes we'll get through. And I spoke to the Financial Conduct Authority about this, and they said, well, we've spoken to him on the phone, and he says he's got absolutely no desire to stop doing this, so you need to find a way to do more. To which my question was, well, so he's breaking the law, you've got his phone number and you've been speaking to him, what are you doing about it? And their answer was, well, it'll take us 4 years to get a conviction, so we're not going to progress it at all. That, I think, is where we get into the challenge of how you deal with something like that. The final thing I'll say, we talked on the kind of politics side about this. Again, we don't allow politicians to monetize the platform. We've also talked about actually creating further incentives for the elected commission around some of this stuff. Because again, we can take down content. If someone's constantly breaking our rules, constantly looking to kind of push things further, actually there's a debate about what powers the elected commission should have to go, well, hold on. You wouldn't get away with doing that in the leaflet, so we need to kind of have something online as well. I think that's part of the debate. I know it's something that the Rycross are doing to kind of make shooting money in politics and that a little bit as well. I think there's some further work about what the offline consequences of behaviour online is, particularly when it comes to news and kind of social policy type discussions.
We nearly had a debate, didn't we, on there, about what is news?
Yeah.
We were going to answer it, weren't we, but we didn't,
I mean, we spent quite a lot of time talking about harm and about what's wrong with social media. Although we talked a bit about community building. But I mean, clearly people really enjoy social media. They enjoy these platforms. They like using them. But the way that people use them has definitely changed. I mean, people post a lot less publicly. People share things privately instead of posting now. Does that matter? Do we think it matters that people don't post and share publicly anymore, that people share things privately? Does that matter for society and culture that people don't have many public spaces where people can talk to each other? Do we think that that's okay? And that people actually are very social in private channels now, and that's fine? Or do we think that there are consequences associated with people posting less and engaging less publicly? And that's a big shift over the last 10 years.
feels like your wheelhouse.
Yeah, I think there are still places we can have plenty of conversations together. I was reading there was a very interesting report that came out from Alex Smith today, who is the founder of the Cares Family, which is a charity that some of you might have been familiar with, that closed a few years ago. And he quotes a kind of expert in loneliness that says, the thing that's good about working on loneliness is the antidote to it is to do the best things in life. And like, what a wonderful sphere to work in, that you're encouraging people to do things that are not just good for them, but really joyful. I mean, literally the best thing you can do in life with an evening is go and see some comedy, or go to a gig, or go and play bingo, or go and just have a conversation with people. So we do focus a lot on the harms, but I also want to make the positive case for in real life, in real time conversation. But just to focus on the harm for 1 minute, I do think that I'm a bit sceptical, honestly, and I know there's been a lot of focus from philanthropy and others on online fact-checking, and I'd say online solutions to online problems. Honestly, the best antidote to conspiratorial thinking is being in the pub with people who can say, do you know what, Jeff, I've heard you, but it's your round. It's literally your round, or we're going to go play darts now, or you've said your piece, but I don't think that's quite right about the vaccine, or I don't think that's quite right about whatever other conspiracy is being shared. I honestly think we need to, we do need to encourage people to spend time together in real life because of all the wonderful benefits that it brings, but it also, in so doing, actually is quite a good inoculation against some of the worst harms. So I just really, and I say it's not to denigrate some of these kind of internal to the platform's solutions, but I honestly think we're just missing a massive trick if we don't rejuvenate the public square as we used to understand it, which is literally a square, place-based, community-based, where people have conversations.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, we ran some focus groups in December, and someone in our focus group said, when you argue with people online, it's quite different. You can just leave, or you can close the page. But when I'm in the pub with my friend and he says something really stupid, you still have to sit there and spend the rest of the evening with your friend who said this really stupid thing, which is pretty true.
Yeah, I agree with that. Because you're going to say, I think, from a TikTok point of view, and it's interesting, in the very early days of TikTok, our view was actually, we actively didn't want kind of political kind of content on there, because it is an entertainment platform, like we want it to be entertaining. It's actually kind of, we don't want that there. We've had to change that with the times, because we know that people are just coming and going to be engaging in those kind of issues on the platform, and therefore we need to kind of build capacity to be able to deal with that. That most means removing bad content, but also means working with publishers, with others, to kind of make sure that we're filling the void of what we removed with the good quality content. So that's important. One other point I just want to make, and it sort of comes back to the question in the report around creating kind of bespoke platforms. I think one of the benefit we would see of the kind of large scale platform we have, and again 30 million people, is we start to see things that are genuine, community driven, interests because of the large number of people. I'll give you two very quick examples. So last year in the UK, there were I think 10 million videos created on farm talk, which was basically, largely, mostly young people who work on farms talking about their day on farms and talking about kind of the importance of rural communities. They weren't going to connect elsewhere, but they've had a huge impact kind of, talking about those issues and finding other people to talk about them. I think that's kind of potentially quite positive. The second is classical music. Now, again, if the assumption, and sometimes the frustrating assumption that TikTok is entirely made up of teens dancing, which is a very, very outdated view of how that works. But the hashtag classical music in the UK increased 1,000-fold, I think it was, last year, because people who were interested in music were suddenly finding, through a few individual creators like Anna Atwood, who's an amazing organist, classical music, they were then going out looking for more and more of that. And what we've then been able to do is, because we've seen that, we've then partnered with the South Bank Centre to create a whole system called Crescendo, which is helping 10 young female classical musicians to start their careers in classical music. Now, I think if you kind of narrow it down to just like, okay, we're just going to have this thing which is just the things we already know about, you do sort of run the risk of those things which kind of bubble up through a kind of organic means, or society kind of going, hey, this is actually interesting. You kind of lose that because you're going to go, and you'll have your one for just this kind of content, and then actually over here will be everyone else talking, and actually, is that helpful? Is that going to be successful?
Any final thoughts before we open up to the audience? I think in response to what you're saying about farm talk, it doesn't really sound like a community to me. So I guess I'm interested in that definition. Is it not just a? I mean, it sounds like lots of people. Are they talking to each other? Is that a community? I guess I don't know how TikTok facilitates people who make similar videos like that to form a community in the way that you're talking about. Is that a community, or is that just a cluster of videos that people find entertaining, and so more people make videos in that vein? I guess I'm less persuaded by hashtags forming communities in the way that you're talking about, or the way that Kirsty's talking about the sort of the social?
So two things. I think they absolutely see themselves as a community, and they engage very closely with each other. So there's large spaces to kind of have to again offline behaviours. Hey, we're all interested in this. We're all posting about this. Let's meet up and actually let's kind of drive in people. So again, where they wouldn't necessarily know that they existed because of the distance between them. There's also, this is kind of more on platform. We have a whole range of tools like duetting and split screen, which allow people to reply to others, right? Which allow people to sort of have that conversation, make videos together, collaborate together to create content. That can be used for a whole range of things, most of the kind of creative industries. But again, it is kind of building those pathways to relationships. And I grew up in a very, very rural community. So I maybe kind of feel this kind of more strongly. But if you live somewhere where there's only like 3 other kids who are even vaguely your age, who are interested in X, Y, and Z, and they're interested in A, B, C, then I'm not saying it is preferential that kind of online may be the kind of conduit out of there, but it is certainly the way that it works, and certainly was not something which existed certainly when I was growing up, which was depressingly all time ago.
Thank you so much, and thank you to all the panelists. We're going to open up to the audience for questions. So put your hand up if you have a question. We're not going to use mics, so please speak up. We've been talking about the move to short form video content, what social media is, social commerce industry. We're talking too much about harms. So any questions at all relating to any of these topics, or any other topics brought up by our panelists would be great.
Just something that I don't think was mentioned as much was that kind of consumerism and the move towards that we see across all these platforms. I think in 2020 when I first downloaded TikTok, it was all people dancing during COVID. It was a really creative, space. Whereas now I'm on TikTok and every third video is either an ad or someone selling me something on TikTok Shop. And I think that is also getting in the way of a community building, because instead of seeing people I know post things in on Instagram, Facebook, on Twitter or whatever, it's ads, and that feels more self-serving to these platforms because it's the way that they get money. And I suppose that's something that we've not really been able to talk about. I'm wondering if there's anything. It's not a question, I suppose. Is it?
All I'd say is TikTok Shop's kind of a growing part of the platform. A lot of people use it. Again, during cost of living crisis, people engaging. Actually, the majority of the successes on TikTok Shop are local UK businesses. And again, I used to work for Deliveroo as well, kind of back in the day, and it's sort of a similar thing, right? Where if you're a high street shop, it's small independent business, struggling to make ends meet on the high street, and the ability to also be doing things online, which can provide a separate revenue stream, I think is positive. There's a balance to be struck. I would, fully accept that. But again, one of the ways that the platform works in terms of allowing people to make those choices about what they're watching, allows people to dial that up and dial that down a little bit.
Okay, any other questions?
Sorry.
Sorry.
Go.
We'll take 2. The back.
Sorry, this is mainly a question for Kirsty, just on Labour government. Just with the proposals currently going through Parliament to give 16 and 17-year-olds the right to vote, and then also introduce pilot schemes that are going to increase online restrictions across the UK. How do you manage to strike the balance and provide young people the ability to get the news from social media during the run-up to the political elections, but also having those online restrictions that may not allow them to see all the news that's currently going on online?
And can we take a question?
Yeah, it's Giles. Given, as you mentioned, the government's consultation on tackling social media at the design level, and obviously the cases in New Mexico and California, you mentioned 3 of the kind of absolute core building blocks of social media, of course, this likes, share, and also pay. If you had to pick one to sacrifice, which would it be?
So, to start with, actually, it's worth saying that our view on the current conservation going on is particularly on the system managers, we genuinely think it's for policymakers to make the choice. I think the value of the consultation approach that the government's taking is there's a huge amount of complex and competing research in this space that is worth kind of actually looking at on the ground. So Norman and others talk about just the complexity of this. So actually taking all of the information, all of the genuine trade-offs, and we've seen some of the charities kind of talk about already some of the warnings that they've had on some of the consequences of this stuff. Not least things like 6-year-olds voting. We often think it's just the policymakers to make the choice, and we all can be guided by what they say. I think what we focus on, spend our time focusing on, is what are we hearing directly from our users, whether that's direct feedback or whether it's things like our youth safety council with kind of young people about where they see active risk, and therefore we should take measures. And that's why, for example, one of the areas we've seen most acute action risk has been on direct messages, which is why we've removed them from use for under 16s. I think probably those things are the things that I think are more clear-cut or to harm personally.
Not really.
Yeah.
That's particularly what it's as a thought experiment, not as a regulation. But the reason I ask you is that fairly self-evident the auto play is pretty integral to, as I understand it, as a very elderly blue sky user, to the way we're talking to my daughters who are my research assistants on it. The auto play is pretty integral to the way that TikTok presents itself, and it's encouraging to hear you saying there's for under 18s, there's a code you have to put in after an hour. That seems a very positive development. But I'm just interested in how much reliance you have from the business model on likes and shares compared to today. And I was assuming that the answer would be that you wouldn't want to sacrifice autoplay. But if you don't want to answer that,
I think that's probably right. I think the way we use likes and shares is actually, it is a useful conduit for kind of what people are interested in. So they do form part of kind of how the algorithm understands the kind of things you might be most interested in. So there's value in those kind of things which goes beyond the kind of use of the platform, as it were, which is why I'm slightly kind of cautious about saying something specifically. And I think absolutely when it comes to, I think autoplay is slightly different. I think influence from all that kind of basket of things in the same space. We see value in those tools. We think they work for users. Again, I think the question that we've got is where do you provide interventions, both in terms of macro intervention, so we have decided that after an hour we should get that decision, but also giving users choice. So one of the things we introduced is that on our screen time settings, users can say, I don't want to use TikTok for more than 40 minutes a day, but they can also say, I also don't want to use it for more than 10 minutes at a time. So I have to give people the choice to go, a session should be this amount of time for me. Again, we see people using those things in different ways. That's probably the best way to engage with the difference between scrolling and recommending for your content versus some of the other things.
Kirsty, do you have to?
Yeah, so 3 things I'd say about young people, and apologies to those of you who heard me talk on this topic before. I'm quite often asked about kind of digital literacy for young people, and I'm like, all my friends, like digital literacy, the people who are putting misinformation into family WhatsApp groups, for the most part, in my experience, are not under 25. So I feel quite defensive about young people's digital literacy, because it's actually, they could school a lot of us in the ability to differentiate fake news from good, and so on and so forth. So first of all, I think we need to give young people credit for their degree of digital literacy. The second thing is, I actually think sometimes older people underestimate their hunger for good information. So I have done, as part of the kind of consultation that's running at the moment, I've done 2 consultations with young people locally in schools, because I'm a firm believer, A, the process is the point, but B, in the process you need to make sure that you're listening to people who have kind of everyday experience of the thing that you're trying to talk about. And young people were very clear with me, almost one of the questions that you're asking in the report of, when you're talking about social media regulation, what are you actually talking about? Because I use this platform to access information, and I use this platform to have fun, and I don't mind so much if you deal with that one, but I have a very high appetite for good quality information, and I feel very upset if you did anything that made me less able to get it. So I think we shouldn't underestimate their real hunger for high quality information. And the third thing, where I think those of us who are adults with responsibility for thinking about children and young people need to be careful, is projecting our own anxieties onto them. Because I have also done community consultations with older people, so as I say, in a matter of weeks I had over 300 people locally email me and said, well, can we just get together and have a conversation? Because as I hope you've gathered over the course of this evening, I am a real believer in like in-person conversation where we navigate trade-offs and make compromises is the point in a democracy. And within 20 minutes, people said, I'm very, very worried about the children in my life because I'm worried that they are addicted, I'm worried they're being full of misinformation, I'm worried, I'm worried, I'm worried, I'm worried, I'm worried. And eventually I just said, are we actually talking about you? Like, and uniformly people went, oh yes, actually thank you for letting me metabolize this anxiety, because actually because the thing that's in play in public policy is about young people were using that as a hook to actually spend time with other people and say, I'm a bit worried about my own use of social media and I'm a bit worried about my own use of technology, and I feel very relieved to have the chance to say that. So I think there's a real risk of kind of very binary thinking or great certainty, which I think is one of life's great evils. We have to consult on this properly, and we have to get it right, and it will take time to get it right, because as I say, there's lots of different kinds of expertise at play in this debate. And actually, I was speaking to some IPPR colleagues about this previously. If you come from a research or policy organisation background, and I was very proud to chair IPPR, and it's an amazing organisation. If you come from that sort of background, it trains you to privilege certain kinds of expertise and certain kinds of information. And actually, in a democracy, we also need to find a way to privilege and give exposure to other people saying, I feel that this is going wrong, and I feel in my life and my day-to-day experience that this is not as I hoped it would be, and it's not as I would want it to be. So give us time to do the consultation and get it right, because if we rush to judgment and are too binary or too certain, I think we'll get this wrong, and it's so fundamental to our democracy. We have to let the process run its course.
Thank you so much, Kirsty and John. We have time for one more question, one quick question, but please do say around in the chat afterwards. Yeah.
So, I may ask you a question. You talk very passionately about clubs, but you haven't told us which clubs you've joined. And Giles, I enjoyed listening to you try and explain that TikTok wasn't a social media company. It struck me as the most persuasive argument I've ever heard in my whole life. But I'm glad that you did. My question for you, though, is you are a new father. Will you let your child join TikTok when he or she is old enough to do so?
So for anyone who didn't hear that, which clubs is Kirsty a member of, and would you let your child join TikTok?
So I actually think in my register of interests that you have to put what you're a member of, and I think I've got the longest register of interests of anyone in Parliament, because I am a joiner by nature. And I come from a family of joiners, and if you believe in things, you should find other people who believe in them and join institutions. And I think this is the kind of point I'd really like to leave you with. It's the joining of institutions that are membership based that gives your collective action durability and sustainability. So there has been, and in the report some of them are mentioned, there have been moments where something has flared up, where people have expressed concern about a particular social question, and it hasn't been sustained. And neither the interest nor the impact has been sustained, is because it hasn't been institutionalised in a membership. So locally, I'm a very proud member of the Bilston Miners Welfare and Social Club. Lots of you might not be in a place that has a miners' welfare, but you might have a trades club, you might have a factory club, you might have a working men's club locally. And the thing I would say is, join us, because you will miss them when they're gone. And once they're gone, you will not get them back. So I think people assume that these are only to be found in coal fields or in coastal towns, and there is a preponderance of them there, but there will be some sort of social club near where you live if you look hard enough to find it. See if there isn't one. Make one. Be the founding member.
Thank you. Dan? Last word.
So, again, on the social media, I don't really mind calling it social media. I'm just saying, like, when we're talking about the consultation, it's really important that we're like technically right on what we're talking about. Like, we can have a debate about all of them. I think there's trade-offs in all of those models. On my kids are 5 and 2, so we're way away from this. And I was having this conversation with my wife recently on kind of wider issues around technology. Like, who knows what the technology will be by the time we get there, first and foremost. But fundamentally, yes, I think one of the things I'm really proud of about the way that TikTok has developed as a platform. Again, we don't do the rest of the platforms by quite some margin, so we've learned some of the mistakes, made other mistakes as well, is that there is a very dedicated team looking at kind of what is the best practice that we can institute, and often that is then picked up and followed by others. So do I think that there is a value in an age-appropriate, over 13 to start with, experience, where you have clear rules about what you're able to, how long you're able to watch and what you're engaging with, and most importantly, and this is, I think, when we're talking about safety, this is the thing that we hear constantly from experts and others as absolutely critical, ensuring that the conversation continues between kind of parents and their teens about what they're seeing online. Because all of the harms, every single harm we talk about, this is why things like dark messages are so concerning to us, every bit of evidence we've seen is that when the conversation between parent and child stops, and the child feels unable to speak to their parent about what they've seen, unable to talk about those issues, unable to talk about the misinformation, that's when bad actors can really get there. So the answer is yes, but with a very clear sense of
What age,
we're going to talk about it.
at what age will you have that conversation?
We barely get a chance to speak about anything at the moment, we've got a 5 but we've already started having it, ultimately, about like what we would do when. I think what's really interesting, you see this in some of the data on the kind of smartphone ban kind of stuff. There's a lot of, you see a lot of reporting like 70% of people think that, 70% of parents think that smartphones should be banned. And you actually look into the age breakdowns of that, and parents of kids under 5, hugely in favour. Parents of kids who are 13, actually that's the tipping point where they start going, no, actually I quite like them having a phone because they're going to be out and about and they're going to engage. I was surprised when all the social media ban, how quickly my kids' nursery chat blew up with it. I was like, guys, none of these people can read or write yet. We've got a little bit of time. But I think safe platforms is really important. I think one of the challenges with the debate that's happening in Australia on social media bans, and this is why I think we think it's the government to decide, or we think it needs to be kind of expansive and capture as many platforms as possible, is one of the really concerning things we're starting to see is we're going, okay, well I can't use these platforms which have tried to design age-appropriate experiences. They're not going out playing with hoops and sticks instead. They're just going on the other parts of the internet which are entirely unregulated and where actually there's an awful lot more harm. Right, so I think actually those curated kind of safe spaces with high bars of regulation, like no one's saying that, probably the right spaces.
What age would you let them post those
I think we need to.
It depends on them.